Hey guys! Tonight we're taking a slow, steamy journey through the volcanic kitchens of Iceland. Yes, real ones where soup wasn't just dinner, it was survival. Imagine this. You're standing in a moss-covered valley, the wind smelling faintly of salt and sulfur. All around you, steam hisses up from cracks in the ground like the earth itself is breathing. You crouch next to a bubbling hole in the rock and lower a pot into it, not over it, into it. Because that's your stove. And no, you probably won't survive this if you forget which stones explode and which ones slow cook mutton. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in early medieval Iceland. There's no electricity, no gas, no microwave that occasionally makes your soup taste like warm cardboard. What you have is the land. And that land is hot beneath your feet. Literally. The island is stitched with fault lines, hot springs, fumaroles, and fields of lava cooled into black twisted stone. Some of these spots are warm enough to bake bread, others hot enough to simmer meat. And that's exactly what people did. You trudge through low hills that whisper with steam, and every few hundred steps, there's another vent puffing gently like an old man sighing into the cold air. The locals call these hot springs, and they're not tourist attractions yet. They're tools. Down in one small village nestled between two hills that look suspiciously like sleeping trolls, a family is preparing dinner. The youngest daughter has the job of gathering the cooking stones, chunks of dense volcanic basalt that have been resting beside a vent for hours, absorbing heat like little sunbathers. She picks them up with thick hide gloves because lava stone doesn't just look hot, it holds a grudge. These stones are more than just heat sources. They're timers. You see, the trick isn't just cooking over heat, it's knowing how long to cook. Icelandic cooks learned that some stones, depending on size and type, held enough heat to boil soup for exactly 1 hour, or 3, or, in some show-off cases, 8. They'd measure out time in stones. 3-stone stew was a casual way of saying, we're eating after sundown. Of course, this method wasn't exactly precise. Some stones cracked under pressure, others fizzled out too early, leaving you with half-cooked fish and a lot of family side-eye. But over time, communities learned which rocks to trust and which ones turned dinner into a lava-scented mess. Historians still argue whether this method evolved independently or if early settlers adapted it from geothermal practices they'd heard about while trading through the North Atlantic. Either way, it stuck. Icelandic families began developing entire menus around which rocks did what. There was even a kind of culinary superstition around it. Never stir soup with the same spoon that stirred a cracked stone, an old cook might warn. Not because it's dangerous, just unlucky. Your nose catches a whiff of something salty, fatty, herbal. It's a lamb and root vegetable broth, flavored with wild angelica, preserved seaweed, and something suspiciously smoky. It's been simmering in a sealed pot nestled into a stone pit for 3 hours. No flame. Just earth heat and time. The ground hums gently beneath you. You shift your weight and feel it the tiniest tremor. Not enough to panic, but enough to remind you that the kitchen you're standing in is technically a volcano's mouth. The woman overseeing the soup checks the rocks. She taps one with a wooden spoon and listens not for sound, but for feel. A good stone echoes warmth. A dead one stays silent. Nearby, another family prepares dough in a tight clay pot. They'll bury it in hot sand later tonight and retrieve it in the morning, freshly baked by geothermal warmth. Hot spring rye bread, they call it today. Back then, it was just bread. You used what you had, and what Iceland had in abundance was angry geology. The wind kicks up, steam blows sideways, cloaking the valley in fog. You hear someone laugh, a deep, chesty chuckle from an old man crouching beside a vent. He's warming his feet and recounting the time a particularly impatient cousin tried to boil fish in a sulfur vent, came back an hour later and it was gone. Bones and all, he says. Either it dissolved or Loki got hungry. No one knows which, but they all laugh. And someone tosses him a smoked herring. Fringe theories say that some of the earliest lava stone cooking methods weren't just practical, They were sacred. There are folk tales that link geothermal soup making to rites of passage, healing rituals, and even spell work. But more on that later. For now, you're just taking in the rhythm, the quiet hiss of the vents, the bubbling of soup in a pot without flame, the feeling of ancient methods bubbling their way into modern curiosity. Your fingers brush over a lava rock cooling beside you. Its surface is rough, pitted, oddly warm like a memory that hasn't cooled down yet. You wonder how many meals it's seen, how many hands picked it up, how many stories it carries. Quiet and blistered. Above you, the sky begins to dim. Icelandic dusk is like a long exhale, the kind that lingers and then vanishes. Someone taps the soup pot twice, then opens the lid. Steam rises thick, fragrant, hypnotic. Dinner is ready. You stay by the steam, drawn closer like a sleepy moth to warm breath. The soup is served in thick ceramic bowls, their edges worn smooth from years of use. It smells like salted lamb, root vegetables, and something wild, maybe juniper, maybe something no one even has a word for anymore. You take a slow sip. It's not scalding hot lava stone soup, rarely is. Instead, it hums, a kind of deep warmth that fills your chest rather than burns your tongue. Now, while you're enjoying your prehistoric meal, let's talk about the kitchen. Imagine if your stove was alive. No, really. The Icelandic hearth wasn't just some brick structure tucked in a cottage. In many places, it was fused into the earth itself. Settlers, many of them, Norsemen looking for land that didn't already have a dozen kings and a dozen wars had to rethink the idea of home from the ground up. So they built turf houses, half buried into hillsides. Walls made of stacked lava stone and sod. The hearth. It wasn't a tidy fireplace. It was often a natural vent, carved or widened, to let in enough geothermal heat to boil water or warm stew, without flooding the room with toxic sulfur gas. A fun balance. Really, cooking near these volcanic mouths was a little like playing chess with a troll, strategic, risky, and oddly personal. One wrong move and dinner was ruined, or your eyebrows. The rocks themselves glowed, sometimes faintly, sometimes like they were remembering fire. And yes, it got hot. Hot enough that they kept pots slightly suspended with wooden rigs or even bone cradles, just to avoid a full meltdown literally. There's a tale of a man who tried boiling eggs directly over a vent. They exploded. The man never married, and everyone blamed the eggs, not his personality. Historians still argue whether these hearths were planned architectural features or simply opportunistic use of what the earth gave. Did they build the home around the vent, or find a vent after the home was built? No one agrees. What we do know is that entire villages formed where steam rose reliably from the ground. It was like a Yelp review for survival. Hot rocks nearby, decent grazing land, strong sulfur aroma, 4 out of 5 stars. You shift your gaze to a nearby structure, barely more than a moss-covered hump in the ground. That's the old communal kitchen, a cave. Really, not all families could afford their own geothermal cooking setups, so they'd share, taking turns at the central pit. There was etiquette. There was schedule. There was one woman, old Margaret, who controlled the spoon rotation with the intensity of a sleep-deprived air traffic controller. Inside the cave, it's surprisingly quiet. The stone absorbs sound in a way that muffles everything except the bubbling. Pots line one wall, some ceramic, some cast iron, some made from welded scraps scavenged off old Viking bow parts. If that last one sounds suspiciously modern, remember, Icelanders were upcycling before it was cool. One particularly stubborn corner of the kitchen is marked with soot that never comes off. A vent once flared there, apparently with so much heat that it melted the pot and cooked the stew in midair. No one ate it. Of course, it was declared a cursed meal and buried with proper ceremony. But the rock remembers. It's still warm. You place your palm on it and feel the faintest tingle, like the kitchen sighs when you touch it. Out in the valley, another family is experimenting. They're using a setup that resembles a slow rotisserie long bone skewers driven into warm rock walls, with strips of meat hanging like primitive curtains. The idea is that the low, consistent heat will smoke and dehydrate the meat at the same time. It's a good idea, in theory. In practice, the wind might change and ruin everything. But they try anyway, because that's what Icelandic cooks do. They adapt. And the food they're making, it's never flashy, never refined, but it works. And it fills you up in a way that feels ancestral, as if your stomach recognizes something older than language. You hear a child ask, "Why don't we just use firewood?" And the mother answers, gently, "Because trees are precious and rocks are eternal." She's not wrong. Iceland was nearly deforested within a century of settlement. Firewood became more valuable than gold. If you were cooking with flame, you were either reckless or rich. But geothermal heat, that was free. You just had to know where to look and be okay with the occasional surprise eruption. Quirky records from 12th century Icelandic sagas even describe arguments over cooking spots. Families would guard their best steam vents with passive-aggressive stone piles or long-winded poems etched into nearby rock. One saga mentions a man who tried to steal hot stones from another family's cache. He was publicly shamed, not by punishment, by being made to eat his soup cold. Brutal. There's something funny, isn't there, about a society living on top of constant, unpredictable volcanic chaos and using it to make dinner. You step away from the cooking pit, your belly pleasantly full and your mind foggy from both steam and stories. The sky has gone from gold to blue to nearly black. But in Iceland, the dark never really wins. There's always a shimmer on the horizon, always a puff of mist from the ground, reminding you that the planet is very much awake. You lie back on a patch of moss that's just barely warm. The stones around you glow faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere below, the earth simmers. Somewhere above, the stars pretend not to notice. And all around you, the quiet miracle of a hearth built not from fire but from the breath of sleeping giants. The next morning, the valley is thick with mist, and everything. Your clothes, your hair, even the soles of your boots smells faintly of steam and salt. Breakfast is already underway. But don't expect pancakes or coffee. This is Iceland, centuries ago. And today's breakfast begins with the delicate act of timing soup with lava stones. You watch as a boy, maybe 12, carries a cloth bundle toward the pit. Inside are 3 stones, each carefully selected the night before. They've been sitting in a natural steam pocket overnight, soaking up heat like secret batteries. His grandmother eyes him the way one might regard a slightly overconfident cat walking across a dinner table. She says nothing, but you can almost hear her thinking, "That 3rd stone better be the right density, or we'll all be chewing carrots until dusk." He lowers the stones one by one into the pot nestled over a vent. Not on the fire again. There is no fire. Just a shallow pit lined with hot sand and stone, with enough geothermal energy to simmer soup. Slowly. Very slowly. Because here's the thing. Icelandic cooking wasn't fast. It wasn't flashy. But it was precise in a way that modern microwave culture would absolutely fail to appreciate. The rocks determined the duration, and each kind of stone told its own story. Basalt, the superstar of Icelandic geology, was the go-to for heat retention. It held warmth steadily and predictably, like a stubborn uncle who refused to leave a party. Obsidian, gorgeous, yes, but volatile. Too glassy, cracked under pressure. Some daring cooks tried it anyway, hoping the slick surface would bless the broths. It didn't. One account says it turned a fish soup bitter enough to make a grown man cry. He later blamed trolls, as you do. Historians still debate whether stone-timed cooking was accidental genius or deliberate innovation. Was it trial and error over centuries, or did someone long ago just drop a rock into a pot and think, this could work? The sagas are suspiciously quiet about who did it first. What we do know is this. Over time, the process became ritualized. Families kept cooking stones like heirlooms, polished, named, sometimes even blessed. You weren't just putting heat into the pot, you were putting memory into it. The big, flat stone with the reddish streak. That was Thorbjorn's stone, good for goat stew. The narrow, sharp-edged one, Ides ember, used only for broth during harvest festivals. There were unwritten rules. You never used a cracked stone, it was bad luck. Like serving soup during a solar eclipse. You never took someone else's stone without permission, and if a stone ever shattered in the pot, the entire meal was discarded. and a priest might be called, or at least a dramatic aunt with a strong opinion on curses. This morning, the 3 stones sit happily in the pot, humming with latent heat. The broth inside bubbles gently, coaxing out flavor from dried fish scraps, a handful of tubers, and something that smells suspiciously like seaweed and lichen. Icelandic cuisine was never about luxury. It was about survival with a pinch of superstition, and that's where the timing comes in. The grandmother taps each stone with a carved bone spoon. One emits a deep thunk, another a dull talk, and the third a high-pitched ting. Her face tightens. Too light, she mutters. She plucks the 3rd stone out with a pair of long tongs, replaces it with a different one from a basket beside the pit, and settles back onto her stool. Timing matters. Each stone releases its heat in a different curve, some slow, some fast, some in temperamental bursts. There were even regional dialects for these stones. In some fjords, people referred to the talking stones ones that hissed slightly when submerged. In the highlands, cooks swore by sleeper stones, which held low heat for entire nights. Some claim that burying stones beneath moonlight made them sing longer in soup. No one agrees whether that's science, sorcery, or just Icelandic poetry in action. A few villages had competitions whose stone kept the pot bubbling longest without scorching the bottom. Winners got bragging rights and maybe a second helping. Losers, well, you didn't want to be known as the one who made cold stone stew. The quirky part, timing wasn't just for flavor, it was a safety mechanism. Without clocks, without even consistent daylight. Hello? Midnight sun. People had to feel time, and lava stones. They offered a tactile, thermal way to do that. You lay your hand on a rock nearby. It's warm, like an animal that's just left its nest. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you can feel the history inside it. How many hands placed it? How many meals it marked? Because this wasn't just cooking, it was story-keeping. Each bubbling pot held more than meat and root vegetables. It held whispers of families, seasons, migrations. The soup became a quiet ledger of the land's generosity, of what survived the frost, of which herbs made it through the last volcanic ash storm. Speaking of which, did you know that after the Laki eruption in 1783, some families were forced to cook using stones coated in ash from the blast? That eruption caused crop failure, disease, even famine across Europe, and yet Icelanders adapted. They scrubbed the stones, they boiled seaweed, they timed soup not by taste, but by need. That's not just cuisine. That's resilience in a bowl. You open your eyes, the grandmother ladles out the soup with reverence, not because it's fancy, but because it's right. Cooked long enough, stirred enough, watched carefully, served warm. You sip it. The flavor is soft, layered, earthy. There's a trace of stone in it. Mineral, grounding. You wouldn't call it gourmet, but you would call it unforgettable. Because this soup, this stone-timed miracle, doesn't just fill your stomach. It slows time, and that, dear listener, is exactly what your evening needed. You're still drowsy from the soup. Its warmth lingering somewhere between your ribs and your spine. But as the valley air begins to clear, a new smell rides in with the breeze, smoky, sweet, and unmistakably herbal salta. Not just soup anymore. Something else is simmering, or perhaps brewing. You follow the scent to the edge of the cooking cave, where a young woman freckles, thick braids, and a laugh that seems to shake her whole body is crouched over a low, shallow pot. The stones she's placed around it are glowing faintly. There's no meat in this broth, no root vegetables or fish. Instead, she's slowly stirring what looks like crushed bark, lichen, and a twist of something red berries, or maybe dried mushrooms. She catches you watching. Not hungry, she asks with a smirk. This one's not for eating. This one's for seeing. Welcome to the moment where Icelandic cooking brushes right up against Norse mysticism. Because when you live in a land of steam and shadows, where the sky forgets to turn off the lights in summer and lava burbles underfoot, you start to believe that not all things you boil are just for dinner. She's a practitioner of Cedar Old Norse magic. And though historians still argue whether cedar was strictly ritualistic or sometimes medicinal, we do know this. Many of its ceremonies involved heat, steam, and long hours of infusion. Some used herbs that numbed the tongue or opened the senses. Some brewed teas that induced sleep or visions, or the feeling of being watched by a bear made of cloud. Quirky footnote. A handful of saga texts mention seers and prophetesses preparing their seeing broth near hot stones, and always in the company of steam. It wasn't just symbolic. It was pharmacological. Geothermal cooking, in these cases, became a kind of alchemy. The young woman plucks out one of the stones, examines it, and places it gently on a folded cloth. She hums as she works, not a song, but something that feels older than melody. You sit nearby, careful not to interrupt. In her world, timing the brew isn't about flavor, it's about alignment. The herbs must steep long enough for the moon to crest a certain angle in the sky. The stones must stay hot through 3 full breaths of fog. The steam must rise straight, at least once a sign the land listens. She explains. You glance around and realize there are others like her scattered across the valley, mostly women. Some old, some very young. They crouch near pots and bundles of dried plant matter, occasionally blowing softly on stones to judge temperature. They're not brewing stew. They're weaving something between history, survival, and spell work. There's a theory not accepted by all scholars, of course, that some of these rituals were tied to weather prediction. Icelanders, living at the mercy of unpredictable volcanic eruptions and sea storms, may have used geothermal steam not just to cook but to read. Condensation patterns on bones, bubbles in broth, the color of steam when mixed with certain mosses. Do we know this for sure? No, but the legends are persistent. And you have to admit, it's more exciting than asking Siri for a forecast. The young woman offers you a small cup. The liquid is dark, rich with forest smells and something else metallic, maybe even electric. You take a sip. It's bitter, then sweet. Then your tongue goes slightly numb. She laughs. You'll sleep very well tonight. You're not so sure. Your vision swims slightly. The mist around the valley seems thicker than it was before, but no one seems alarmed. In fact, a few of the older women begin singing low, rhythmic, almost like a chant. Not in modern Icelandic, something older. This isn't a party. It's a ritual, and cooking, if you can even call it that, is only part of it. You glance down at the lava stones lined up in a row beside you. Each is marked with ash smears and small runes scratched along one edge. Not for flavor, for focus. One particularly smooth stone has a spiral worn into it, likely from years of being turned by the same pair of hands. Another has a hairline crack filled with herbs, sealed in with wax. You realize, with a start, that these aren't just tools, they're keepsakes, personal relics. Every stone tells someone's story and maybe holds onto a bit of it. 2. The young woman sets aside her cup and begins to clean the pot carefully, scraping out the herbs and leaving a pinch on the ground. For the hidden people, she says casually, as if everyone leaves offerings to invisible neighbors. You've heard of these before, the Huldu folk, Iceland's hidden folk, spirits of the land, believed to live in certain rocks or hills. Some families left them food. Others simply asked permission before building a house or digging a hole. And yes, some even consulted them before choosing which lava stones to cook with. Historians, of course, are split. Some say it was tradition. Others say it was a clever way of respecting nature. Still others, usually the ones with the loudest sweaters and the driest conference talks, insist it was all metaphor. But sitting here now, surrounded by steam, warmth, and that bittersweet aftertaste dancing on your tongue, you're not so sure. Because in this place, and in this time, cooking isn't just about sustenance. It's about connection to the land, to the past, to the invisible. The wind picks up again, the song fades, and the valley begins to settle into its late afternoon hush. Lava stones cool slowly in the breeze, still radiating a quiet heat. And the soup, it's still bubbling in a pot not far away. A new batch. One that isn't for magic, just for supper. But honestly, does it matter which is which anymore? Evening seeps across the mossy hills like ink dropped in a bowl of cream. The steam vents soften in the golden light, and the air cools just enough for your breath to join the mist in thin clouds. Somewhere deeper in the valley, someone's whistling a slow, almost haunting tune. and then plop a lid. Drops on a heavy pot with a sound of finality. This isn't just any meal. Tonight, it's fish head soup. Now, before you grimace, know this is Icelandic cooking history. Not a single bit was wasted. Not because they were frugal, though they absolutely were, but because they had no choice. The terrain offered what it could, and often, that meant fermented shark, dried seabirds, and yes, fish heads, sometimes boiled, sometimes dried, occasionally smoked, always treated with the kind of reverence normally reserved for church bells or grandmothers with mysterious brooches. You settle in near a family preparing their version of seyðir höfuð, a hearty broth made from the heads of Atlantic cod, pollock, or haddock. The aroma, strong, sharp, but not entirely unpleasant. The trick, you're told, is the pre-boil soak. A few hours in seawater, then a hot rinse with lava stones. Then into the pot they go. The grandmother in charge has a collection of stones specifically chosen for fish energy, whatever that means. One is oval-shaped and polished smooth from years of broth duty. Another is jagged and chipped, adds character, she says with a wink. She adds a dash of dried seaweed, some angelica root, and 2 mystery herbs that nobody under 30 can name anymore. The pot is sealed, nestled in an insulated pit lined with flat black stones, and covered with a heavy linen soaked in seawater to trap heat. It will sit there until the stars rise high enough to reflect in the broth. While you wait, someone offers you a different delicacy, hakarl fermented Greenland shark. It's been buried in gravel for months and then hung to dry until it smells like ammonia and forgotten sins. You nibble politely. Your brain tells you this is food. Your nose files a protest. Still, you chew because out here, everything has a reason. The shark's toxicity is removed by time and earth. Just like how the lava stones temper their fury by resting, everything wild is tamed eventually. Historians still argue about whether these fermentation methods began out of desperation or innovation. Was it preservation science or a dare that became tradition? The truth probably lies somewhere between a lack of refrigeration and a very confident ancestor with no gag reflex. The fringe detail. There's a long-standing folk belief that certain soups, especially those made with sea creatures, could borrow the voice of the wind. Not literally, of course, unless you talk to the older generation. One tale tells of a man who slurped a particularly cloudy fish broth and woke up speaking in tongues, specifically seal, a side effect of over-fermentation, or a salty brush with the supernatural. We may never know, but someone wrote it down, and someone else believed it. A boy pokes the steaming pot with a stick, and his mother swats his hand away. Timing is key. The lava stones underneath are 2-hour stones tested last spring, and known to hold heat long enough to break down cartilage without turning everything to mush. The grandmother pulls out a piece of parchment with notches scratched into the edge, her personal stone clock. She lines it up with the shadows cast by the fireless pit and nods. Half an hour more, she says. You take a stroll while you wait, drifting toward the edge of a small cliff overlooking the sea. Below, black rocks jut out of the foam like old knuckles. The wind is cold now, but back then, during long winters, these winds carried the promise of food or the sting of famine. When sea conditions were too rough to fish, people turned to their stored stones. Heated rocks could be dropped into seawater to make emergency broth. Weak, yes, but warm. And warmth, in those days, could be the difference between living through February or not. Back in the valley, the lid lifts again. Steam billows out thick and musky. The broth has turned golden, its surface shimmering with a faint rainbow sheen from fish oils and sea minerals. Bowls are passed. You're handed one. The eye of the fish stares up at you, clouded but still somehow judging. You take a sip and it's delicious. Deep, savory, with a tang of brine and the faint, earthy hum of stone-heated thyme. It's not a flavor you'd find in a restaurant. It's a flavor you earn by waiting, trusting, and maybe ignoring the smell during step one. The family eats quietly. In Iceland, meals weren't always social feasts. Often, they were focused moments, shared bowls, passed spoons, and the occasional muttered praise when someone nailed the timing. The lava stones are removed, wiped, and placed beside the hearth. Tomorrow, they'll be reheated for a different recipe. maybe lamb stew, maybe dried root porridge, maybe a potion. Who knows? But tonight, they've done their job. The stars above twinkle faintly. The steam around the valley begins to drift apart, unraveling like wool in slow motion. And you're full, a little bit bewildered, and absolutely convinced that you've just eaten soup made from magic, sea monsters, and ancient kitchen science. And somehow, it worked. The sky, somewhere between navy and black now, stretches overhead like a bowl turned upside down. A few northern lights begin to flicker across the horizon, just enough to make you wonder whether soup might actually be the second most magical thing in Iceland tonight. But down here, back in the Valley of Steam and Stones, timing isn't guided by clocks or candles. It's guided by the moon. You crouch beside a small group of elders seated around a shallow geothermal vent, almost like a family hearth. Except this one hisses occasionally and smells faintly like burnt eggs. They're not speaking much, just listening, watching, occasionally glancing skyward. A young man stands nearby with a pot cradled in cloth. He doesn't move toward the heat just yet. He's waiting, not for the pot to get warm, not even for the right moment in conversation. He's waiting for the moon, because tonight's soup isn't just dinner, it's timed by tides and sky. The old lunar cooking method, if you can call it that, hinged on something Icelanders understood well. The sea controls the land, and the moon controls the sea. When tides rose, certain vents bubbled more aggressively. When tides pulled back, the heat dropped. It was like having a geothermal dimmer switch hooked up to the cosmos. Historians still debate whether these connections were formalized knowledge or intuitive guesswork passed down through poetic sagas and squinted observations. Some scholars point to carved whale bones, etched with tidal symbols. Others call it coincidence, or wishful thinking backed by a few lucky stews. But ask the people sitting here, and they'll tell you it's real. When the moon is high, and the sea sighs against the cliffs below, the vents boil deeper, the stones glow longer, and the soup, it listens. Tonight's broth is a special one prepared only when the moon is full. It's called bergmálgrautur, which loosely translates to echo porridge. It's not actually porridge. It's a mineral-heavy soup made from powdered seashell, dried fish liver, and crushed volcanic glass. Yes, glass. Just a pinch. For spark, the old woman explains, though whether she means flavor, texture, or spiritual fireworks, you're not entirely sure. The preparation requires intense timing. The stones used to heat it are too thin, really, for regular use. But that's the point. They react to subtle changes in vent heat. One side burns hotter than the other, depending on which way the moon pulls the sea. The pot is placed carefully into a sandy depression, propped up with sheep bone wedges. The stones go in slowly, not touching the bottom, but cradled on either side like hot hands guiding the bowl. The effect, uneven heating. On purpose. It's meant to make the broth breathe. You ask one of the men what that means. He shrugs. Like us, he says. The soup should inhale and exhale. Take its time. Think. You're not sure if he's joking. You're also not sure it matters. The steam rising from the pot does, indeed, pulse. A gentle swell. Then a lull. Almost like lungs or waves. You close your eyes. It's so quiet, except for the hiss of the vent and the slow, deliberate scraping of a wooden ladle across the pot's rim. Someone hums a tune old, tuneless, rhythmic, the kind of sound that keeps time without needing to mark it. Fringe records from 13th century journals speak of entire coastal communities who only made soup when the tide matched a certain moon phase. Some recipes were considered tidal exclusives. Meals that, if made outside of the lunar window, would spoil, curdle, or summon bad luck. One monk even wrote of a soup that screamed when made during a solar eclipse. No one knows what he meant. The manuscript ends with a spilled ink stain and a faint, greasy thumbprint. The pot here begins to bubble, not in a frantic boil, but in a slow, musical glop. Glop, glop. The grandmother stirs clockwise, always clockwise. She doesn't say why. She just narrows her eyes and mutters something about left-handed witches. A boy next to her holds a carved stone, flat and triangular, with a symbol that looks suspiciously like a moon inside a fish's mouth. He dips it into the pot briefly, then places it on the ground. Still needs 10 more breaths, he says, as if that's a totally normal measurement. You breathe with it. In. Out, in, out. The air tastes faintly of salt and sulfur. Eventually, the grandmother nods. Ready. They pass around the bowls deep, hand-carved, rimmed with soot from years of use. The soup inside glows faintly in the moonlight. You sip it. It's sharp, earthy, somehow clean and gritty and warm all at once. You can taste the ocean in it, the rock, even the sky. It's a full-body flavor, one that lingers long after you swallow, like an echo, which you now realize is the point. The soup is meant to remind you of tides, of timing, of forces much older and stronger than hunger. You glance at the grandmother. She smiles with her eyes. Don't eat too quickly, she says. Soup like this should last longer than a story. You slow down, and for a moment, just a moment, it feels like the moon is watching your spoon. You wake to a sky that barely changed color. That's the thing about Iceland in summer. It doesn't really get dark. It just rests, like a giant pulling the covers up to its chin, but keeping one eye open. There's a crispness in the air now. Morning dew clings to tufts of grass and steam snakes from the cooking pits, as if the earth itself is still yawning. But even as the world stretches and blinks, one pot remains sealed, buried in a shallow rock chamber, untouched. Because this soup has been waiting for weeks, you shuffle toward it, half curious, half concerned. A tall man stands nearby, wrapped in a woolen cloak that's seen better centuries. He's holding a large wooden ladle like it's a ceremonial object, which, technically, it is. His beard is thick, his eyes pale blue, and he has the expression of someone guarding a treasure or a time bomb. This one's not for hunger, he says. It's for memory. The soup he refers to is part of an Icelandic tradition now mostly forgotten, except in a few isolated valleys and folklore books with cracked leather spines. They called it minnisgrautur, literally, memory gruel, not the most appetizing name, granted. But this dish wasn't about flavor. It was about time. The recipe, staggeringly simple: dried barley, fermented root vegetables, bone marrow, and a pinch of ground lichen. What made it special wasn't what went in, but how long it waited to come out. This soup was slow-cooked in the truest sense, buried in layers of thermally charged stones and peat, then sealed away for days, sometimes weeks. The low, steady geothermal heat didn't boil it. It coaxed it, softening the barley until it bloomed, dissolving marrow until it wept into every spoonful. The pot here, it's been buried for 17 days, sealed with beeswax, marked with a ring of small stones, one for each member of the man's family. They say when it's ready, it tells you, not with smoke, not with smell, but with silence. When the bubbling stops completely, when the heat evens out to a dull, steady hush, you know it's time. You crouch close and place your hand over the pit. Warm, yes, but not hot. The kind of warmth you feel when someone holds your wrist and means it. A comfort that has waited patiently, without rush or noise, still humming. The man says, just a little longer. Historians still argue whether this was ceremonial or practical. Some claim these long, steeping stews were tied to seasonal markers, solstices, funerals, even oaths between clans. Others insist they were just clever storage solutions. You buried food where it would keep cooking, hidden from both frost and wandering animals. But local lore disagrees. One tale tells of a woman who stirred her minnisgrautur every night at the same hour, whispering names into it. She believed the soup would remember what she no longer could. When she died, the village ate it together and swore they all dreamt of her that night. Some claimed she whispered in their ears. One man said she slapped him for leaving his boots out. Skeptical, of course. But you're also standing in front of a pot that's been underground for over 2 weeks, being gently rocked by the breath of the earth. So who's to say? Finally, the man removes the covering stones. Steam escapes not in a dramatic whoosh, but in a sigh. He lifts the lid. The smell is subtle, nutty, earthy, like wet bread and moss and something almost sweet. He stirs, slowly, reverently. The porridge moves like it's been dreaming this whole time. Bowls are filled. You're handed one. It looks like oatmeal. If oatmeal were brewed inside a cathedral built from stone and fog, you take a bite. It is not exciting, but it is deep, layered. Every flavor has had time to settle into itself. It tastes like a conversation that started weeks ago and is just now getting to the point. No spices, no salt, but there's a quiet richness, a whisper of marrow, a ghost of roots, something in your stomach sighs, as if recognizing an old friend. And then something odd. You remember something you forgot. Not a big thing, just a feeling. A walk in a forest. A song your grandfather hummed while sharpening knives. A moment that floats up from somewhere inside you, brought forward by warmth and stillness. You glance at the man. He nods, as if expecting this. These soups, remember, he says, so you don't have to. Around you, others eat in silence, not solemn, just soft. A child laughs, and no one tells him to be quiet. Because even memory needs levity sometimes. The lava stones that lined the pit are pulled free one by one. Still warm, still pulsing faintly with heat. They'll be left to cool slowly beside the cooking cave, where tomorrow someone else will place them into a new pit. With a new story. Maybe not for 17 days, maybe just 2. But the rhythm continues. You finish your bowl, you feel full but not just with food, full of something quieter, like time itself. By mid-morning, the valley smells like ash and broth and slow plans. Families wander between vents and stone pits, trading news, herbs, and sometimes just stories. But one corner of the hill is quieter, and smoky. You follow your nose to the edge of a shallow stone circle lined with soot-darkened bones, blackened branches, and the unmistakable scent of something being burned on purpose, not destroyed, transformed. A young man with soot streaked across his face is stirring something deep and dark in a wide, low pot. This is not dinner. This is ritual. This is a blend of ashes, bones, and brewing. You squat nearby, careful not to interrupt. He doesn't speak, but his movements are steady and deliberate. One hand holds a carved ladle, the other drops fragments into the simmering mixture. Small bones, bits of charred wood, a dried claw you'd rather not identify. You've arrived at the part of the Icelandic cooking tradition that toes the line between culinary and ceremonial. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuinely spiritual or merely survival strategies made poetic over time. But the accounts are consistent. In some communities, certain soups were made only during death rites, coming-of-age ceremonies, or catastrophic harvests, not for nourishment. For transition, this pot, you're told in a low whisper by a woman passing by, is brewing a bondagrautur, a kind of landowner's stew made not for a person, but for the land itself. When herds died, or the earth stopped yielding crops, people made offerings like this, marrow from honored animals, the ash of sacred herbs, and sometimes crushed antlers or burned flowers from ancestral gardens, a kind of soup prayer. The lava stones used for these brews were always chosen carefully, ones that had cracked but not broken, or those found near old burial cairns, stones with memory. As they said, these stones were never reused for regular cooking. Once they touched ritual broth, they were retired to the edges of the village or given back to the earth in quiet, little ceremonies. You're pretty sure it didn't involve many witnesses. There is a fringe theory rare, dismissed by some, that says these stones once acted as records, absorbing emotional residue from the rituals they helped heat. Some even suggest that when laid in a certain pattern, they could replay old moments through steam, through dreams, through something else entirely. You won't find that in textbooks. The stew bubbles quietly. It's thick, blackish, smelling faintly of iron and juniper. No one eats it. Instead, it's stirred until sundown, then poured in a slow spiral along the roots of a sacred tree. A real tree, one of the few still standing in the valley. A gnarled birch wrapped in ribbons and wax cloth charms, swaying as if it knows what's coming. Nearby, a girl no older than 8 grinds dried angelica root into powder, then sprinkles it over hot stones in another pit. The scent that rises is sharp, almost peppery, but calming, like wild medicine. Her job isn't to cook, it's to cleanse. Stone-based cooking wasn't just about flavor or timing, it was about space. Preparing the area, clearing the spirits, warming the bones. Meals mattered, but so did the moment before the meal. The breath you take before swallowing, the silence before the first stir. She hums a little song as she works. No words, just syllables that rise and fall with the wind. You've heard it before, or maybe not. Maybe it's just one of those sounds that feels familiar the second you hear it. In the stone circle, the young man finally lifts the pot. He carries it with both hands, walking a careful spiral around the birch. The steam rises in coils, vanishing into the branches. No one claps, no one cheers. They just nod. Something's been fed. Something ancient, something quiet. You wander back toward the center of the village, the scent of bone broth prayer still clinging to your clothes. Another fireless kitchen has come to life. This one smaller. A family of 3 huddles around a shallow vent, carefully lining the pit with sea-polished stones. They're preparing a night broth, one meant to simmer through dusk and be ready just before sleep. This one isn't for ceremony or survival. It's for belonging. Inside the pot, dried milk curds, a pinch of salt, and crushed birch leaves. Simple, faintly sweet, a comfort soup. The kind a mother makes not to nourish the body, but to remind the heart it's safe. And the stones, soft-edged, pale from years of use, passed down from grandmother to daughter, daughter to son, not because they were the best stones, but because they were theirs. There's something strange about all of it. Strange and beautiful. Here in this land of lava, ice, and fog, cooking wasn't always about eating. It was about remembering, honoring, listening, not just to hunger but to the air, the land, the stories inside the steam. You pause beside a small heap of retired stones. They're cracked, some stained, some carved with faint spiral patterns or notches. They sit quietly now, warm even in the breeze. You reach out and touch one. It hums, not literally, but in your fingers, in your chest. There's something, a pulse, a memory, maybe, or maybe it's just the warmth. You can't tell if the wind is carrying a scent or a song. You're not sure it matters. The sky turns a milky gray by afternoon, and a soft drizzle begins. Nothing serious, just enough to slick the rocks and give the moss a deeper glow. You pull your cloak tighter, brush droplets off your sleeves, and follow the sound of raised voices echoing through the valley. But these aren't arguments. They're stories, laughter, a kind of huddled celebration. You round a bend and find a group gathered under a sloped turf shelter, half lean-to, half steaming oven. There's a pot in the center, nestled into a pit surrounded by large, black lava stones. And the smell, unlike anything so far. This soup once saved a village. That's what the old man says, pointing to the bubbling broth with a wooden spoon that's been repaired so many times it's more charm than tool. You sit beside him. His voice is rough like driftwood and warm like peat smoke. He doesn't tell the story quickly, he simmers it, the way all Icelanders do, slowly, with pauses where his eyes mist and his words lose their footing for a beat. It was 1362, he says. During the massive eruption of Öræfajökull, crops gone, animals starved, ash so thick it turned the sun red for weeks. The ground shook for days, the earth having a tantrum. He chuckles, and the sky was filled with the kind of wind that strips bark off trees. People fled, but one tiny hamlet in the valley didn't run. They couldn't. The mountain had trapped them, with no firewood, no grain, and no signal to send. They did the only thing they could. They cooked with lava. They buried pots deep into the warm earth, using the stones that still held heat from before the ash fell. Every family pooled their scraps, dried seal meat, bits of lichen, fish skins, even bones they'd already boiled twice. They poured in seawater, and they waited. The soup was thin, the salt was harsh, but it was warm. And when the nights dropped below freezing and even the sheep huddled like guilty criminals, that soup kept them alive. Not just one night, not two. For 40 days, every morning, the villagers added to the pot like a living recipe that never died. A child would run from house to house with a wooden bowl, collecting whatever you've got, and pour it into the mix. Herbs, roots, a strip of dried lamb jerky from someone's wedding stash. The soup became communal, constant, and, they said, healing. Historians still argue whether this event is real, legend, or some mix of both. The only written record is a monk's scribbled journal entry found near the coast years later. It reads simply, "The valley boils, and they live." The old man taps the rim of the pot now. "We make this stew once a year," he says, "to remember the ones who stayed." You lean in. The soup smells rich, meaty, earthy, with something sharp beneath. Turnip, wild garlic, hard to tell. The stones surrounding the pot are thick, flat, and blackened from decades of use. They don't glow, but they radiate. You can feel the heat from feet away. These aren't timing stones. These are holding stones meant to trap warmth and release it slowly over hours, even days, like anchors of fire beneath the surface. You run your fingers along one rough, pitted, and strangely comforting. It's a cooking stone, yes, but it's also a gravestone, a monument, an ember of memory. A young girl begins ladling the soup into wooden bowls, each marked with a running of wax to seal in heat. She passes them to the crowd, some kneeling, some seated, some simply standing in the drizzle as if nothing could possibly be more important than holding that bowl. You're handed one. The broth is thick and dark, speckled with roots. Bits of dried seaweed cling to the rim. You take a sip. It tastes like survival. Salty, strong, a little chaotic, but real. The kind of flavor that reminds you how close we all skate to the edge and how, sometimes, all that stands between us and the cold is a shared pot and the patience to keep it warm. Someone starts humming low and steady, and before long, the group joins in. It's not a song exactly, more of a tone, a shared note. It vibrates in your chest and hangs in the air like mist. And then, without ceremony, the old man adds a new piece to the pot. A sliver of whale fat wrapped in bark. For tomorrow, he says, because this isn't a one-night stew, it's ongoing. A few of the stones are swapped out. Fresh ones, pulled from the heated cave nearby, are inserted into the pit. The old stones are removed gently, wrapped in cloth, and laid aside like sleeping children. The cycle continues. You sip again, and you realize something. This soup didn't just save a village during one eruption. It's still saving people. Just differently now. Not from cold, but from forgetting. From thinking we're alone. From rushing through our days without remembering how many generations once lived by a stone, a pot, and a prayer that dinner would still be warm in the morning. The wind shifts, the drizzle thickens. You pull your hood up, and you feel, strangely, full. The next shelter over doesn't smell like broth. It smells like wax, wet wool, and bread just shy of burning. You follow it instinctively, stomach still warm from survival stew, but curiosity fully awake. Inside, you find a group of monks, or at least what passes for monks out here, robes faded to gray, sandals patched with seal hide, and the kind of brows that furrow even in sleep. They don't look up when you enter. Their focus is absolute because what they're making is sacred, not in the holy sense. In the daily survival wrapped in ritual sense, you're about to discover what the monks slurped. The pot at the center of the room is small, no bigger than a helmet. It's nestled into a slab of volcanic rock that has been carefully carved out, creating a cradle for both the vessel and the flame-free warmth of the stone beneath. This, you realize, is a geothermal altar, not just a stove, a thing built to hold heat and history at the same time. One monk is slicing dried mushrooms, brittle, black, and rumored to grow only on north-facing cliffs, kissed by storm foam. Another crushes something in a stone bowl, dried nettle, wild garlic, a few strands of horsehair, for body, he murmurs, for breath. The recipe, a version of clofasupa, or cloister soup, known more for its function than its flavor. It was believed to clear the mind, calm the blood, and strengthen the gut before long fasts. Not surprisingly, it tasted mostly like boiled twigs and regret. But here's the twist. Despite its lackluster ingredients, it required incredible precision. The monks tracked stone temperatures like clockmakers. One flat basalt disc was known to retain heat for 3 silent prayers. Another lost warmth too quickly and was relegated to drying socks. The monks would rotate stones like timepieces, adjusting placement to keep the soup at a sacred simmer. Historians still argue whether these rituals were genuine medical practices or just spiritual discipline wrapped in dinner. A few believe the monks were experimenting with primitive hydrotherapy. Others say they just liked their mushrooms with a side of chanting. Fringe texts describe cloisters where stones were named: Brother Blackstone, Heat Bearer, and the one that cracked during Lent. Some monasteries even kept stone logs, carefully tracking the lifespan and behavior of each geothermal helper. You lean closer. The monk stirring the pot smiles faintly. "We don't salt this," he says. "Salt is a distraction." You nod solemnly, not because you understand, but because this feels like the kind of place where silence is the appropriate seasoning. The soup begins to bubble just lightly. The monk takes a small carved ladle and scoops out a cloudy sip. He tilts his head, waits, then nods. "It's ready." Bowls are past hollowed driftwood, rubbed smooth by time and handling. You're handed one. You brace for bitterness. You get something else. It's thin, barely more than warm water and memory. But there's a depth to it. The kind of flavor that doesn't shout. It just sits with you, like someone who doesn't talk, but makes you feel less alone in the room. The warmth spreads slowly. It doesn't thrill your tongue, but it does something deeper. Calms your breath, loosens your shoulders. The monk beside you sips, then places his bowl beside a pile of neatly stacked rocks, each one marked with a small rune. You realize they're being warmed. The bowls, the stones, the air itself, all part of the same cycle, one of care, of patience. This isn't about hunger. It's about being still. Someone begins humming, low, measured, barely a sound at all. The youngest monk fetches a new stone from the outer vent and places it gently beneath the slab. The warmth pulses upward, unnoticed unless you are paying attention, and you are paying attention now. You can't not. This entire ritual is quiet insistence on presence, on breath, on the idea that cooking can be meditation. One of the monks breaks his silence long enough to tell you that these cloister soups were once used in negotiations served during tense land disputes or in times of grief, not because they were delicious, but because they slowed everyone down, forced them to breathe. A bowl that takes 20 minutes to sip is a bowl that makes people think before they speak. The geothermal stones here, they're older than the monastery itself, pulled from the same earth that once buried a neighboring village in ash. Each stone a reminder that the land gives and takes, that to cook with it is to ask permission. You finish your soup, your fingers wrap around the empty bowl like a cup of shared silence. You nod to the monk, and he nods back, satisfied, not proud, just present. Outside, the rain has stopped. The wind carries the scent of new broths, herbs, and the faintest trace of wax and moss. You step back into the valley, a little lighter, not full, but fed. The valley, damp from rain but still warm beneath the feet, seems quieter now, not hushed in fear, just thoughtful, as if the steam itself is reflecting. You wander past pits left to cool, stones stacked in soft spirals, and bundles of herbs drying beneath ledges, and then you see her, a woman wrapped in wool, seated on a flat stone with a long stick in one hand and a bowl balanced on her knees. She isn't eating, she's watching. More specifically, she's on soup watcher duty. Turns out, when your entire cooking system depends on slow, geothermal heat and an unpredictable landscape, someone has to babysit the pot for hours, sometimes overnight, and that someone, often a designated soup watcher, you approach quietly. She hears you. Of course, her ears are sharper than the ladle she uses to test heat. She gestures for you to sit. You do. "It's been bubbling since dusk," she says, eyes never leaving the small, wide-mouthed pot resting in a shallow stone cradle. Now it's thinking about not bubbling, and you realize, yes, the soup is thinking. The stones beneath it are different from the ones you've seen before, flatter, paler, with streaks of red iron and a kind of shimmer when the steam hits them just right. "These are whisper stones," she says, "not as hot, but steady. They won't boil over unless you insult them." You nod like this makes sense. Because here, it kind of does. The soup isn't moving much, just a pulse now and then, like a sleeping animal that twitches in its dreams. She leans in and listens, still murmuring. She says, satisfied. This is the part of cooking most of us never see anymore. The waiting, not the baking, not the plating, not even the serving. The being with. When food isn't a task, it's a presence. She tells you stories in pieces, how in older times, soup watchers were chosen carefully. They had to be still for hours, calm, alert, but not anxious. In some villages, soup watching was given to those in mourning, a silent task, a quiet return. In others, it was given to children too restless to sit and too curious to stay out of trouble. Let them stare into soup until the world slows down. One elder had reportedly said, "You glance at the pot. The steam rises soft, rhythmic. There's something meditative about it, hypnotic. Then the wind shifts, and for a split second, you hear something else. A voice. Maybe, or maybe just whined through lichen. But she hears it too. Her eyes narrow, not scared, just curious. She doesn't stir the soup. She doesn't speak. She just listens. There's an old belief, she explains, that if you watch soup long enough, especially when cooked with whisper stones, you'll hear the memories trapped inside it. Not words, not sentences, just impressions, a feeling, a name, a color from someone else's childhood. Historians, of course, call this superstition, but they weren't the ones sitting here, night after night, letting heat and broth rewrite their dreams. One woman reportedly saw her mother's hands every time she watched carrot soup steam through birch smoke. Another man claimed a pot of barley stew once gave him the courage to propose marriage. He said the soup winked. People laughed. The marriage lasted 47 years. The woman before you, her name's Ellen, leans in close to the pot and hums. Not a tune, just a note, a single, low vibration. The soup stills, then bubbles, then settles again. There, she says. What? You ask. It agreed. There's no spoon in the pot. Not yet. Just time, heat, and a stone watcher with more patience than most kings. The soup she's guarding, a wild nettle broth with bone marrow and fermented berries. Not flashy, but meant for night dreaming. A supper designed to make you sleep deep and dream true. Some say it was once given to wandering poets before long journeys. Others claim it kept children from sleepwalking into snow. A few old journals suggest the recipe could only be made when 3 types of stones agreed in temperature and the watcher could hear it. You're not sure if Eileen is making this for someone else or herself. Either way, she continues to hum, not often, just enough to keep the rhythm. You lean back on the moss. The clouds begin to part, and you catch a glimpse of the moon through the steam. The pot gurgles once soft, like a laugh, and settles. Eileen finally lifts the lid. She doesn't look inside. She doesn't need to. She knows the soup is ready. She takes a small wooden cup, dips it gently, and offers it to you. You sip. It tastes like bark, like pepper, like sleep. But there's a whisper beneath it all, a memory that isn't yours, a dream, maybe borrowed just for tonight. Not far from the soup watcher's perch, you notice a peculiar arrangement near the edge of the hill, a half circle of stones perfectly aligned, slightly scorched, surrounding what looks like an old cauldron resting in a bone cradle. Beside it, 3 teenagers hunch over something that looks experimental. You're about to witness the science of stone soup. Well, not the fairy tale stone soup where a clever traveler tricks villagers into sharing their ingredients. No, this is actual soup cooked with stones inside the soup, not beneath it. Here's how it works. They heat palm-sized lava rocks over a vent until glowing red, then drop them directly into the pot of cold water. An ingredient's a method known locally and proudly as Sjodstein's yomi, or boil stone cream. The hiss when the rock hits the liquid, like a dragon sneezing. One of the teens grins and pokes the surface with a long iron fork. The soup sizzles, bubbles violently, then calms. Another heated stone is ready. It's lifted from the glowing pile with thick bone tongs, held aloft like an offering, and plunged into the pot. Pop! The water leaps, steam billows, the scent explodes. This method, they tell you with enthusiasm only teenagers possess, was once used when there was no time for slow simmering or no way to build a proper cooking pit. You boiled your soup in a wooden bucket or even a leather satchel, dropping in rock after rock until your seal meat or dried root mash was edible. You raise an eyebrow. Leather satchel. One of them nods eagerly. Horse stomachs too, she says, cleaned. Of course. Of course. Historians still argue whether this was an emergency technique or a nomadic standard, something practiced by travelers, hunters, or shepherds without access to geothermal vents. Whatever its origin, the science behind it is oddly effective. Lava rocks especially, vesicular basalt retain enough heat to boil water instantly, even without flame. And depending on the shape and weight of the stone, you could control the temperature spikes with surprising precision. Too big a rock, and your broth would erupt out of the container. Too small, and you'd be sitting for hours. The trick, one boy says, is listening to the hiss. If it spits once, it's good. If it sings, it's done. You listen. The rock in the pot whistles, not loudly, just enough. Inside, the soup churns a pale beige mix of rehydrated root vegetables, seal oil, and dried skyr curds. Not the prettiest dish, but survival doesn't care about presentation. It wants calories, heat, and something to chase off the cold from your teeth. One girl explains that her grandmother once dropped a rock too hot into a fish stew, and it split the pot. We had soup for 2 seconds, she laughs, and then soup for the ground. You ask about the stones themselves. Do they always survive the plunge? Nope, she says. Some shatter. That's why you test. Test how. She gestures toward a small basin where a dozen stones soak in cold water. A cracked one is removed. It's tossed aside, not into the trash, but onto a pile of rejected soup stones nearby. Fringe belief says these broken stones are too eager, they try to cook too quickly, and pay the price. Others say they absorb the spirit of the meal and must never be reused. Either way, they are respectfully retired. Some are even carved with symbols and offered to the sea. You watch another glowing rock rise from the fire, held delicately, almost reverently. This one is darker, heavier, with a flat edge. This one's good for barley. Someone murmurs. The stone is lowered in. This time, the hiss is different, more of a whoosh, deeper. The pot responds like it's alive, churning, steaming, singing. The teens cheer softly. Perfect boil. They ladle out the soup into tiny clay cups, no handles, no embellishments, just practical vessels, stained with time. You sip, it tastes rustic, slightly burnt, a little sour, but warm in a way that's physical and emotional. You can feel the rock's work in it. That strange volcanic kiss. The girl beside you sighs, wiping her brow. I love when the rocks don't fight back, she says, and you laugh, because somehow. That makes perfect sense. You ask them how many stones they've gone through. Hundreds. One boy says, but we keep the good ones. They show you a pouch of polished stones, wrapped in fur. Each is etched with a mark, simple runes, dots, scratches. No one else would know what they mean, but they do. These are their tools, their recipe cards, their silent companions in heat and hunger. One even has a name, El Crawlfire Troll. You ask why? Because it once boiled soup in 6 minutes and cracked a deer bone in half? Fair enough. As the group begins preparing a second batch, you look down at the pot still bubbling softly, still humming with borrowed heat. The steam curls upward into the cool air, wrapping around your fingers. And suddenly, you understand. This isn't just cooking, it's alchemy. You're turning stone to heat, heat to soup, and soup into memory. As you drift farther through the valley, passing the sharp clink of ladles and the constant whisper of steam, a new scent grabs you by the collar. Not meat, not seaweed, not even sour fermented something. This is smoke. Thick, oaky, mysterious. And it's coming from a stone hut just large enough to stand in, half covered in turf, with smoke curling through a crack in the wall like it's escaping a secret. You push open the low wooden door and step into a haze. Inside, a woman in a leather apron stands barefoot on hot stone slabs, her hair tied back with dried kelp. A row of pots sits along one wall, but she's not stirring any of them. She's tending to the fireless oven. Yes, the secret ingredient was smoke. Icelanders didn't just use lava stones to heat their meals. They used them to flavor everything they made. Because when your air smells like sulfur and your firewood is limited to driftwood and dried dung, smoke becomes seasoning. The hut functions as a kind of early smokehouse meets kitchen, with lava-heated stone walls and channels in the floor where herbs, mosses, or even bones are burned gently. There's smoke creeping up around the pots like shy ghosts. The woman gestures to one pot, a lamb and barley stew. Simple, but it's being hotboxed by birch bark smoke. infused not just from the bottom up, but from all sides slowly, evenly, like incense wrapping itself around your dinner. She lifts the lid. The aroma hits like a memory campfire, wildflowers, and something faintly metallic. We don't stir often, she says. Too much motion chases the smoke away. She adds a pinch of dried moss to a side vent. A moment later, a curl of smoke slips across the pot like a spell. You can taste it before it touches your lips. Historians still argue how intentional this flavoring method was. Some claim it began as accidental pots left in smoky huts, or vented rooms doubling as kitchens. Others argue Icelanders developed smoke timing as a technique, controlling intensity by adjusting the stone temperature, the herb bundles, or even the ventilation geometry of the hut. Fringe lore says the best soups came not from ingredients, but from what surrounded them, that the air itself changed the dish, that a properly smoked soup could wake the old tongue, a mythical moment when someone tastes something so ancient. They speak words no one's used in centuries. You look down at your hands. They smell like birch and iron. The woman taps a stone with the heel of her foot, checking the warmth through her toes. It's not unusual here. Some cooks claimed foot sensing gave better feedback than any tool. You raise an eyebrow. She grins. I trust my feet more than I trust my cousin, she says. Fair enough. The pot continues to bubble. Above, dried fish skins hang like paper streamers from a wooden beam. They rattle softly when the wind moves through the hut. The sound is oddly soothing, like wind chimes in a world built of broth and stone. You take a seat on a folded wool mat near the wall. She hands you a wooden bowl and pours a ladle full of the smoky stew. It glistens faintly, tiny beads of fat floating on the surface, like stars on the Black Sea. The color is rich, brown-red, speckled with dark barley and thread-thin slivers of lamb. You sip. It tastes like depth. There's warmth. Of course, the meat, the grain, but then the smoke unfurls. Not harsh, not bitter, just present, like the stew is whispering where it came from. The moss, the bark, the stone that breathed it into being. You close your eyes, and for a second, you're not in a hut. You're in the smoke itself, floating. When you open your eyes again, she's sitting across from you now, sharpening a spoon with a thin volcanic shard. This one's for tomorrow, she says, nodding toward a second pot that hasn't even begun to simmer. Salt cod and charred dulse. We'll let the smoke do the work while we sleep. You ask how she times it. She points at a pile of fire-cooled stones in the corner. Each one holds for an hour. Stack 5 for midnight. Stack 10 if you want dreams. The dream stack. You've heard of it. People used to align hot stones at night, not to boil, but to flavor dreams through slow smoke and scent. Sleep seasoning. Some say it guided travelers. Others say it helped poets finish lines they couldn't write awake. You sip the last of your bowl, it's stronger. Now bolder, as if the smoke has settled deeper while you weren't watching. The woman reaches over, lifts the pot gently, and sets it closer to a fresh stone. She adds a few strips of dried juniper bark to the smoke channel. Every stew needs a little edge, she says. Outside, the drizzle has stopped. The air is cool again, but your chest is warm. Not from spice. From something deeper, from the way smoke wraps around time and turns it into flavor. You leave the hut slowly, smelling like firewood you never saw, carrying a bowl you already finished, and tasting a memory that wasn't yours to begin with. A cool breeze cuts through the valley now, tugging at your cloak and tousling the edges of wool blankets drying on fence posts. The sun lowers with theatrical laziness, just brushing the hills with gold, like a painter stalling before the final stroke. And through it all, you hear the clang of a pot being lifted, a wooden ladle tapping the side like a soft drum. This isn't ancient history. This isn't ritual. This is makeover hour. Because even in a place where tradition holds strong, Icelandic cooking lava stones, vent pits, bone soups and all didn't freeze in time. Like the land itself, it shifted, adapted, evolved. You find yourself outside a larger shelter than the rest, half wood, half turf, with carved beams and a polished stone floor. Inside, the pots are newer, shinier. One even has iron rivets and a lid that fits snug. And the people stirring them, not grandmothers, not monks, traders, travelers, mid-1400s foreign hands in Icelandic kitchens. It's here you witness the soup's transformation. Gone are the chunky broths and ash-dusted barley. Now you're looking at diced root vegetables, even carrots, imported by Dutch merchants, dried herbs bundled in linen, fish cured in citrus, not just brine. Yes, citrus came from a Portuguese shipwreck, one man says proudly, holding up a shriveled lemon slice like it's a holy relic. Took us a week to figure out it wasn't poisonous. Turned out it made seal meat bearable. He laughs, you laugh. But your stomach is more interested in what's bubbling in the large pot at the center. You peek inside. What you find is a fusion stew, a blend of smoked mutton, wild fennel, fermented skyr, and a broth made rich with foreign grains, not barley, not oats, rye. You can thank the Hanseatic League for that, someone mutters. Historians still debate how much influence outside trade had on Iceland's rural cooking practices. Some claim that even after merchants arrived, islanders kept their traditional methods, lava stones, and all hidden, treating foreign food trends as novelties. Others argue that the blend of native and imported ingredients was not only accepted but celebrated in communal cooking. A few rare manuscripts describe hybrid pits where slow stone methods were combined with metallic inserts, allowing travelers to boil wine, steam shellfish, or make stews without the usual 3-hour wait. And yes, they still used lava rocks, just differently. The woman stirring the pot now uses 2 lava stones, one to heat, one to filter. She drops the second stone, a porous, cooled slab, into the pot just before serving. Takes the edge off the seal fat, she explains. Cleans it up, softens the bitterness. It sounds like myth, but then you sip the stew, and she's right. The flavor is wild, like mutton seasoned by travel itself. A little salty, a little sweet, smoky in the background, but balanced. And there's a clarity to it. Not clean, exactly, but focused, as if the stew made up its mind before it reached your spoon. In the corner, someone slices bread, hot spring rye, of course. But this version has been braided, laced with dried berries, and glazed with something sticky. It's not rustic. It's refined. You dip it into the stew, and suddenly, it's not just Iceland anymore. It's Lübeck, Lisbon, Bergen. You taste wind from the docks, salt off the crates, and spice that never grew anywhere near this island. A young cook passes around a small glass bottle, etched with foreign symbols and filled with olive oil, traded for eiderdown. She says, 1 bottle per year. She drizzles it onto her portion of soup like it's liquid gold. You ask if the older generation accepted all this. She shrugs. Some did, some pretended not to, but stole seconds anyway. Not all changes were welcome. Some villagers saw the new ingredients and tools as intrusions. They claimed that fireless cooking was being corrupted, that lava stones should remain pure, unchanged by foreign hands. But others embraced the alchemical possibilities, the idea that the land could still heat, still hold, but the soup could shift with the wind. The lava rocks never left the kitchen, but they found new roles as timers, flavor balancers, even cooling stones, added to slow down fast boils from imported iron pots. The woman stirring leans over and whispers, "You should have seen the look on my grandfather's face when I added cloves to eel soup." You imagine it, somewhere between betrayal and enchantment. Fringe tales from the late 1400s describe traveling chefs half welcome, half feared, who brought bottles of foreign spice blends and dropped them directly onto steaming stones to release fragrance into the air before the soup even began. You wonder what the stones thought of all this. Did they resent the new flavors, or just hold the heat and let the story change around them? As dusk settles, the stew is ladled out with long-handled scoops made from horn and bone. The bowls are mismatched. The bread is passed by hand. The table is just a long plank of driftwood balanced on 2 barrels, and yet it feels like a feast. You dip your bread again, the oil glistens, the steam rises like old voices learning a new language. Outside, the sky goes indigo, the stars return, and somewhere, a lava stone is still warm, ready for what comes next. The stars have fully emerged now, sharp and clean in the chilled sky, scattered across the velvet dark like seeds flung from a giant's hand. You walk slowly through the valley, tracing the final scents of the day, smoke fading into dew, herbs mellowing into air, and that ever-present whisper of something warm still cooking just beneath the surface of the earth. Because even now, it's still bubbling. You find yourself at the far end of the hill, where the slope dips into a shallow basin. Here, the grass is short, and the rocks are darker, richer in iron. The locals say, And in the center of the basin, surrounded by small lanterns made from carved driftwood and fish bladder skins, sits the last pot of the night. But this one isn't ancient. It isn't wrapped in folklore. It's just alive. You've arrived at a modern Icelandic soup gathering, a festival held every midsummer, where families and travelers bring their best geothermal dishes not to compete, but to remember and to keep the heat alive. Around you, people sit on woven mats and turf-covered benches. They hold thermoses, ladles, bamboo cups, and bowls made of glazed ceramic or cow horn. It's a mix of the old and new tattoos and smartphones beside sheepskin and stone. The soup bubbling at the center is a communal one called eldsupa, or fire soup. It's built over 3 days, each new group adding something different to the base. Carrots, lamb, thyme, barley, dried kelp, birch ash, sour whey, fish flakes, mushroom powder, even a hint of cocoa from someone who clearly broke the rules in the best possible way. And beneath it all, lava stones, dozens, not just to heat the pot but to flavor the moment. You crouch close and notice each stone has a ribbon tied around it. Red for meat, blue for fish, yellow for root vegetables, white for herbs. The children learned the color codes that morning. It's their job to match the ribbon to the ingredient and hand the stone to the cook at the right moment. It's how they learn, not from books, but from being near the steam. You sit down. Someone hands you a wooden cup with a chunk of bread pressed into the side. You're given a serving of eldsupa. The smell is impossible to define. Warmth. Yes, salt. Something sweet, something bitter, and something that makes your lungs pause before you sip as if your body knows it's about to swallow not just food, but time. You drink, and it's all there. Every chapter of this valley. You taste the seal broth from centuries past, the root-thickened gruels, the memory stew, the bark-smoked lamb, the accidental citrus. The stones are there, too, you swear it, whispering through the steam. Historians might scoff. They might say lava stone soup belongs in the past, that modern Iceland has ovens and ranges and dehydrators and apps that measure temperature within 1/10 of a degree. And yet, here they are, dozens of people huddled around a pot filled with rocks that came from a time when the earth still screamed fire from beneath your feet. And the stones, they're still doing their job, still holding heat, still telling stories. You lean back and feel the wind shift. Someone laughs softly. A toddler tries to name every single ribbon color and gets 3 out of 4. A teenager stirs the pot with a spoon longer than their arm. An elder sits beside you, sipping slowly. They don't speak. They just are. Because here, soup isn't just food. It's connection. To weather, to memory, to the people who stayed, to the ones who adapted, to every cracked stone that held heat long enough to keep someone alive through a winter too dark to measure. And even now, in a world of screens and speed, these stones still bubble quietly beneath the surface, asking nothing but time. You take another sip. It tastes like belonging. And beneath the laughter and the soup and the hum of the wind moving through the grass, the stones still glow faintly in the dark. The pot has gone still now, its final ripples fading like footprints in sand. People begin to pack their things, not in a rush, just slowly, with the rhythm of sleep pulling gently at the edges of their eyes. The lanterns flicker low, casting long shadows across the moss. You stretch your legs, your body warm from the inside out. The scent of broth still lingers in your nose, earthy and sweet. And the stones, they're cooling. You can hear them settling, faint clicks and cracks, like sighs from a fire long finished. You walk past them quietly, running your fingers over the rough surfaces. Each one has done its part. Each one carries the heat of memory now. The wind is softer, the voices fade, and the valley, this strange, steaming, story-soaked place wraps itself in a kind of silence that only comes when everything that needed to be said has been said. You lie back on the moss. The stars blur above you. The air is sharp, but your chest is warm. Maybe tomorrow the soup will begin again. Maybe it won't. But for now, the stones rest, and so should you. Let your breath slow. Let the warmth linger. Let the stories steep inside you like barley in a quiet pot. You've been part of the simmer now, and somewhere beneath the soil, the heat still holds, still waiting, still gentle, still there,